and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the PA UK network. My name's Paul Rook, and I'm your host for the show. And as always, I'm joined by Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello, guys.
We're not amazing this week, Richard.
No.
We've lost our amazing status.
We've been downgraded.
I'm tired. What can I say?
What have we done, Paul?
You haven't checked my blog. That's what it is.
Right. It's on my to-do list. I'm getting through my to-do list.
In that case, you could be both amazing again.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that didn't last long. We were down.
So how have you been this week?
Been doing all right. Yeah, I've been out and about. Well, popped out yesterday to a little local town close to me and done a good walk and around the town. A place that's always been close, but never really sort of investigated it properly. So I thought, whilst it's pretty quiet out there, I'll go for a nice walk. So yeah, spent a good couple of hours walking around, and I found a cannon. I'm well happy.
Another woo!
Awesome. I bet it was a nice cannon with big wheels on the side. And,
yes. Nice Napoleonic 16-pounder, I think. Foot artillery, but we won't go into that.
Did it have its balls with him?
No, it didn't. It was just set there nicely on the roadside. So a nice static display. So that's me well happy.
Good.
Excellent. And you have a blog out, Richard?
Yes, that's right. On my adventures to when I visited the Martello Towers, there's a set of about 4 or 5 along the Essex part of the coast, part of the Clacton Beach defence line. So if anyone wants to find out a bit more about that and my adventures, my day I spent looking at those, you can head over to the website or the Facebook group page, and the blog's up on there.
And what's the website address, Richard?
Yes, it's paranormalconcept.com.
Well done. You've
Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward.
And Paul,
last
time we spoke, you was on a spiritual experiment, and you've written 2 blogs that are actually up on the paranormalconcept.com website. If you want to go and check out the first 2, you've actually kind of come to a conclusion of that particular part of the experiment. Why don't you fill people in a little bit more about the last couple of blogs coming up and how you felt about that spiritual experiment?
Okay. I can't remember what I put in them now. It was because I'd done certain experiments with spiritualism, do it like taking my own path, meeting my spirit guide and all that sort of thing. And obviously it was done in stages over the 4 sessions, and I wrote a blog after each session. As you said, the first 2 are already on the website, so we've got obviously 3 and 4 to go, and it was quite interesting actually. Some of the things that come up, especially in regards to a big battle that was I can't remember what it was called now.
Battle of Naseby by any chance?
That's it, yeah, Battle of Naseby. Yeah, because one of my sessions was just before that, and I actually picked up on a battlefield. So it was quite interesting, some of the things that I was picking up. There was other bits and pieces that I was getting and that I was a bit second-guessing because of conversations and things like that I had previously. Was it me thinking about that and not totally clear in my mind, or there was lots of other explanations why that sort of stuff popped into my mind. But it was a really interesting experiment, and I'll probably be carrying it on at some stage, just when I've got a bit of time to do a bit of meditation and just working with it and seeing how it goes.
So you started really from a very sceptical perspective and having not really sort of like embraced that side before. And where would you say you stand now? Would you say you're more open-minded about it?
I'm still open-minded, but I still have the problem of second-guessing everything. It's just because I'm an investigator at heart, and, I question everything. So, we'll do a show, for example, on like, we've done one on Newgate Prison. So if, we were discussing that show and then I'd done a meditation and I got something from a prison or something related to that subject, then I'd be like, well, is that because, we were discussing it? And that sort of, but this battle, the Battle of Naseby one, it just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, because you wouldn't necessarily know that.
No, I didn't. I didn't have a clue about it. It wasn't until afterwards that Viv turned around to me and said, like, do you realise it was actually the Battle of Naseby? And I was thinking of going on the anniversary on Saturday, which was a couple of days after I'd done the session. So, I was like, no, I didn't know that at all. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, definitely.
But
it's certainly food for thought.
But it definitely shows the concept, doesn't it, of keeping a balance between your sceptical and believing side. It's not as clear cut as it's all bunkum and it's all spiritual. Do you know what I mean? You have to keep a balance, doesn't it? And so.
Well, that's it. I mean, I kept second guessing most of it. Like, for example, the Spirit Guide, for example, it had a connection to St. John. Now, I've been doing a lot of...
Sorry about my dog. It's windy and every little bit is setting off at the moment.
That's what he's got to say about it.
I know.
Yeah.
Shut up.
But, he's definitely on one today.
Honestly, it's because it's windy, so I'm going to poke him with my pen. Shut up.
But, it was... Because obviously I'd done a lot of work with St. John at the time, and it was quite forefront in my mind. Is that why I got that particular spirit come forward?
Or maybe that spirit's linked to you because you're in the St. John's and there's a link there between the two of you. You could go either way, but it does demonstrate that balance between being completely sceptical and being completely spiritual. You have to keep a balanced mindset. Now, tonight, we're actually going to take a look at a character, a very well-known character in the paranormal, who very much was outright believer. Now, we talked about one of his cases last week, or one of his perspectives last week, on the Cottingley Fairies. This is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was an amazing character, actually, when we looked at him, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. And, I mean, I didn't, obviously, until you sent over the research, I've actually, the only thing I knew about him was that he wrote Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's...
he must have been really, I think, he must have been really clever to write that because it's so complicated and there's so many avenues of, investigating and everything in the program or the books even. It's amazing stuff.
Richard?
Yeah, well, he certainly is a character. I mean, sort of, again, and I will sort of say what Paul said, sort of going through the research, I've certainly sort of built up a broader sort of picture of the person himself, as opposed to just knowing he wrote Sherlock Holmes, which is quite interesting. I think a lot of people in the field will know about his sort of interest in spiritualism, but I think his whole sort of like life and his whole character makeup sort of explains a lot of how he arrived at his later sort of like conclusions about spiritualism and his very sort of strong, undying belief in it.
That's one thing.
I do think.
Yeah, carry on.
I do think there's, that people that's listening would probably know one or two different things about him, but he was like a physician, a writer, sportsman, poet, politician, justicer, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Spiritualist, campaigner, and adventurer, and the list just goes on. So, you might just know about his, I didn't know he was a physician. I didn't know at all that he was a doctor.
Yeah.
But he was, and, I didn't know that. Obviously, I knew that he had an interest in the paranormal, and he wrote, he wrote books, and Sherlock Holmes particularly.
Yep.
But I didn't know about the rest of the stuff, and I was like, wow, busy man.
One thing that comes across with we're just going to call him Arthur. Shorten it down. Our Art. Yeah, one thing that does come across is you have got such a divide between what we kind of know. What I kind of expected when I started looking at Arthur was he would approach the spiritual in the same way we would see his precision, rationality from his character of Sherlock Holmes. That's not the case at all. It's like completely polar opposites. That's the thing that struck me with this one. And I think it kind of demonstrates in one person. There are so many facets to a single person. You can't make an assumption from one aspect like the Sherlock Holmes stories about his character. Because when we looked at him, he is absolutely fascinating, which is why we're going to talk about him tonight. Because he is such a diverse character. Now, he was born on May the 22nd in 1859 in Edinburgh. He was actually Scottish.
Ooh, okay, the new.
Okay, the new indeed. Now, they were a prosperous Irish Catholic family, so he's come from a well-to-do family, although family life wasn't particularly stable. His father was a severe alcoholic, but his mother made up for that, so he became kind of a mummy's boy. And part of the reason he really resonated with her is she was a master storyteller. She would talk, and this is where his passion for writing and storytelling, and this comes from his mother, because that's how she helped him navigate this hard time of his father's alcoholism, basically.
Yeah, well, there certainly seems to be sort of like an aspect of escapism for him through that, and he even sort of comments he doesn't really sort of have sort of his sort of overriding memory of his mother sort of seems to sort of block out his unhappy sort of memories of his father. I should imagine that sort of. So it obviously did have a very profound effect on him.
Actually, in his autobiography, he actually says, in my early childhood, as far as I can remember, anything at all, the vivid stories she would tell me stand out so clearly that they obscure the real facts of my life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's from his own words. And I think that sums it up for him, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, at age 9, he was actually sent to a Jesuit boarding school in England, but this was paid for by other members of the family. He didn't like it, far too strict and corporal for him. He only wanted really to be with his mum, and that's what he spent a lot of time doing, was writing to his mother. And he liked cricket.
Oh, tally-ho, yeah. Good old game of cricket, yeah.
Good old English sport, that, right?
What?
And he was such a young age. I mean, you think that's 9. And that's when he realised that he also had a talent for storytelling.
Yeah.
He graduated in 1876, and again, in his autobiography, he said, "Perhaps it was good for me that the times were hard, for I was wild, full-blooded, and a trifle reckless. But the situation called for energy and application, so that one was bound to try to meet it. My mother had been so splendid that I could not fail her." Oh, bless him! I wish my children were so considerate.
Yeah.
I wonder if they write something like that about me in their autobiography in later life.
Very much
Probably not.
Very much about it.
Probably not, I would say. I'll
It'd
go
be
with that one.
11:30 every night. She'd ring her bell for a cup of tea.
Yeah,
Like a cankerous old mother, yeah. With her bell.
Then we know it.
Now, they actually had to commit his father to a lunatic asylum, and this obviously was very traumatic to him. But out of trauma, how many times do we say trauma creates amazing genius almost?
Well, it's always that sort of thing. You always get these sort of artistic types and authors and stuff. They seem to live their life very close to the edge. That defining line of being a genius and being stark raving bonkers is a very defined line.
It is.
And that seems to be where a lot of creativity in the human psyche lies.
Exactly. Oh, I totally agree. I think that is a very defining line there, isn't it? And he actually wrote, he actually was able to express his trauma through his writing, and he wrote The Surgeon of Gasterfale off the back of this traumatic time for himself, which I can't even imagine how that must have felt. It must have been a double-edged sword. Like, on one hand, your father's gone far too far down that road to be helped, so you've got to do something, and then on the other side of it, it's that just the fact that you've got to commit your father.
Well, yeah, and especially back then, I mean, it sort of the process back then, and I suppose when you committed someone, you never saw them.
No.
They were literally just put away, and and that was it, really. Must have been quite a traumatic time, even though probably his father, his memories of his father are not that great. But even for a young adult, that would still be a traumatic time to go through.
No, very much so. Now, at this point, he decided to follow a medical career. Whether or not that's influenced by his need to help his father, it's quite possible to go into that medical profession. But it was also quite a good profession, for somebody of his standing. A well-to-do family, follow the medical career. It's a good career for him to follow. So we're not quite sure of his reasons for wanting to follow a medical career, but he went to the University of Edinburgh and met lots of influential people. Now, amongst the people he met there, he met James Barrie of Peter Pan fame. And we know that story inside out, don't we?
Oh, of course we do. Yeah. Tinkerbell the fairy, isn't it? Peter Pan.
Damn that fairy, as we discussed that last week.
Smee.
Exactly,
Indians,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's, these are the people that he's surrounded by. He's met all these people at this time, influential writers that became well known in their own right, with massive conceptual ideas that they're putting out in their stories. He also met Robert Louis Stevenson from Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde fame.
Yeah.
Again, two very enduring tales.
Yeah. I mean, I find it amazing, but these people all sort of around this sort of time, the Victorian era or the late Victorian era, I mean, these people all seem to know each other. All these sort of, who later became quite famous, they all seem to be interlinked somewhere along their lives, don't they?
They do. I think society, though, I think if you look at society, it was smaller then.
Yes, smaller, and I think a lot of people would write back then, and if you were aspiring to sort of get out of your sort of like your normal routine, I mean, authorship was a way forward. I think there's no television and stuff like that, and writing was probably the big thing to do, and to get into becoming a successful writer was the route to fame and fortune, so to speak.
There is actually, I think it's a film about James Barrie, and I think it was called Finding Neverland. And I think in that, didn't he have a difficult upbringing, or it was pretty similar to Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah, it's very...
and I think it is almost like all these people have that in common, and they all chose to focus it into writing some of these great novels.
But think about it. There's no radio, there's no TV. You're from well-established, the class system was very defined then as well. You know what I mean? So they're mixing with people of the same sort of social standing. And the one way of expressing yourself is by writing. I mean, journaling, diaries, letter writing, all those sort of things. That's what you did. Reading, writing, studying. Those were the things you did. And your creative side came out in things like, gardening and painting and, music. Those were the areas you would focus on for fun. But writing was such an integral part of everyday life. That's how you would invite people to parties. You'd write to them. I mean, nowadays you just send out a social media call. Hey, party, everybody!
Party at Kerry's place.
And back then it was, you are cordially invited to an evening entertainment with so and so. You know what I mean? That's how it was done. So he's mixing with these type of people in that type of environment. It's actually a melting pot of creativity and able to express in a way that you wouldn't nowadays gets lost in amongst all the distractions we have today. It's actually a lost art. I'm not saying there aren't good authors out there, but you'll find that they are generally quite hermity type people. They don't really interact on social media because they're more concentrating more on other things. It's very, it's very, very that sort of mindset, isn't it? Where you're head down and concentrating and more internal in the brain, allowing that brain to process things in a way. Now, he was also, one of his teachers was a Dr. Joseph Bell. Now, this guy, if you look into Dr. Joseph Bell in his own right, he is the ultimate in critical thinking. He masters in observation, logic, deduction, diagnosis. All of those factors is where Dr. Joseph Bell comes from. There is not effectively one creative bone in his body because it is all done by observation and logic and deduction.
Sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it, everybody? But that was basically his inspiration for Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that comes later because he actually wrote a short story around this time called The Mystery of I can never. Somebody else try and say that word for me.
Sasasa Valley.
Yeah, that's the one.
Sasasa Valley.
Yeah, thank you.
Of the Sasasa Valley, yeah.
Yes.
That sounds about
The
right.
mystery of that place. And that was published in an Edinburgh magazine called The Chambers Journal. He was only 20 when this happened, so he's starting to push his work out there. Now, this is where we start to see a little bit of his interest in, like, mystery and the supernatural and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Because within that book, it's basically, it's about a ghost that leads them to some treasure, effectively. It leads them to a diamond, a massive diamond, and that men become rich. So it shows his sense of adventure, his interest in the supernatural and ghost stories, and it also shows his skill at writing. Even though he was only 20, it's still very... In fact, this book is still so readily available, it shocks me. Or this story, should I say, is still very readily available out there, so you can go and read it. But it's a traditional ghost story kind of tale. A light is seen, it's called a ghost. The two lads try and find it, follow the ghost, and find a diamond, basically. That's basically what it is.
Again, a very product of its time, the colonial era. It's got all the aspects of it as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
South Africa, which would have been sort of like even back then, still would have had an air of mystery about it. And, diamonds. I mean, what more do you want? Treasure, diamonds, and ghosts. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Very much so, but it is still very basic. There's not a lot of depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a basic story that follows a traditional format, but ticks a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, very good sort of story to have in a periodical of the time, a magazine sort of filler, I should imagine.
Yeah. Now, he wrote a second story that year called The American Tales, and that was actually published in London Society, making him... He actually says about this, it was in this year that I first learned that shillings might be earned in other ways than by filling files. He's suddenly starting to realise that he's got this talent himself and that he may well be able to supplement his income of being a doctor with this other passion of his.
Mm.
Yeah, because what you've got to remember back then, I mean, all doctors' practices and stuff are private, so you were quite reliant on people paying to actually come and see you, unlike today, where you become a GP and you sort of go on the NHS payroll and you sort of like guaranteed a wage, but back then you weren't.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It was a question of going out and making your money for yourself, and it's not always relying on an employer for that.
Yeah.
You was expected to go out and make your own money effectively, which actually I think is a signpost of the privileged at that time. They had those opportunities. That's a very class thing. Now, this story sort of starts looking at more prosaic. It's less mystery in that. But his sense of justice comes through because one thing which you'll find out later in the show is Arthur Conan Doyle's sense of justice and his social moral standards are incredibly strong. His distinction between right and wrong is so strong, and he hates injustice. And this is really kind of what he's addressing, that if you do wrong, karma will get you, basically, in some shape or form. And that's basically what this story is all about on this one. But again, this one not so well known out there, but it's an interesting tale. And again, it doesn't really hold a lot of depth, basic story, but it's starting to show a more complex form of writing behind the standard. It is starting to show more of a complexity.
Yeah, I should imagine. Yeah, as you say, it's him developing. It's his first foray. It sounds like his first foray into sort of like expressing his own thoughts and stuff through his writing, as where the previous sort of thing is probably sounds like an adventure yarn.
Yeah, I do think he had a bit of notice on this one. People started to notice him. He earned a little bit of money out of it. Not a lot, but a little bit. And it started to wake him up on this one.
To the possibilities.
Yeah, I think that story as well is a bit far-fetched and maybe taking influences from possibly, I don't know, who wrote the Journey to the Centre of the Earth?
Jules Verne.
That's it, yeah. I reckon a bit of there in there. Because it was just that the main character that committed murder in the book was captured and killed by a giant Venus flytrap.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can imagine all these people that he's had around him at this time, they're talking these kind of concepts and these ideas, aren't they? So it's opening his mind, he's opening his imagination up a little bit. And obviously with his studies, he's studying these kind of the botanies and the, physical side of things. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. So he's immersing himself. He's in his third year of medical school at this time. So he's obviously looking at plants and what they're good for and whatnot, and he's also looking at the effects on the human body of these things. So that's starting to flow through too. Now, around this time, he was also offered the post of a ship surgeon on the Hope, which is a whaling boat, and it was about to leave for the Arctic Circle. I can't think of anything more horrific. I'd be going, no, I'm all right, thanks. I'm quite happy studying here.
Well, you don't know his financial position. That would have been a paid position, so perhaps that sort of was quite encouraging for him to actually take. And I mean, I would certainly go for it back then.
And by the time he got there as well, he could have wrote about 4 books.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but it might be one of those times where in your third year you have to go and do some practical work. And he got the job of like a medic on this boat. So this is going towards his doctorate.
Yeah.
It might be one of those scenarios. But they first stopped at Greenland, where they went on a seal hunt. And I think we all, even in our memory, we know how they do that. It's very brutal. Process, not nice at all. And he was actually appalled by the brutality of it, or he didn't like it. Generally, he genuinely enjoyed the camaraderie on board the ship, and the whale hunt part of it fascinated him. And he states that he went on board the whaler a big straggling youth. I came off a powerful, well-grown man.
Well, there you go. Away at sea, eh?
I think it must have been a huge learning curve for him.
Well, it must have been, sort of growing, let's face it, he would have been sort of landlocked up until that point, sort of probably didn't venture very far from where he lived, Edinburgh and the surrounding areas, and, to go out to sea. Yeah, go for it and take that opportunity. And he obviously had a sense of adventure about him. He wasn't shy of travelling.
And it inspired him to write his first story about the sea, wasn't it? Captain of the Pole Star.
Yeah.
It's called.
Yeah, he did. Which is one of those tales. Again, it's born out of experience, isn't it? But it's also, again, bringing in apparitions and phenomena and superstitions of the crews and that sort of thing. It brings all that into it. The captain leaves the ship, disappears into the darkness, and it's all that mystery again. He's bringing that mystery and that supernatural back in.
He must have been exposed a lot to that whilst at sea, because as we've done before, we've done the Tales of the Ancient Mariners, one of our podcasts, and even as late as the Victorian time, I mean, seafaring was very steeped in superstitions and tales and stuff, and these would have been very prevalent, and he would have picked these up from his adventures out at sea.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. And now he's got this awakened sense of he's now lived. There is a massive transitional stage, and I think boys go through this more than girls do, where you go out into the world and you're a man-child.
Mm-hmm.
You're testing your strength, you're testing your character, you have to go through that process, don't you?
Yeah.
Of testing yourself, and I do think this is more of a masculine thing than a feminine thing, to find out your true mettle. And I think he went through that when he was on that ship Hope, and when he started writing, I think it definitely shows a definite more that it becomes more solid. He becomes more solid in his writing because he's learnt more about himself on that trip, and he's become a man. He's become that man. So when he returns to his studies, he gets his Bachelor of Medicine and Masters of Surgery degree, and he's now confident in his own abilities as a person. He's gone through that transitional stage now.
Yeah, and there's the very famous thing when he received his diploma. He done a little cartoon of himself, didn't he, with the caption, "License to Kill." Shows he had a sense of humour.
I think that's one thing he did have, a sense of humour. But again, the complexities of his character are starting to come through, and he is very complex when you look at it.
Well, yeah, I mean, a typical sort of well-educated Victorian man, I should imagine, sort of pushing the sort of boundaries and wanting to explore, both going out there physically exploring, travelling, and sort of like exploring the depths of what writing can offer.
Mm-hmm. Now, he then took employment on another ship called the Mayumba, which basically was going between Liverpool and the west coast of Africa. He hated it, didn't like it at all in any way, shape or form. And then he took a stint, should we say, in a doctorate, in a doctor's surgery in Plymouth.
Yeah.
That didn't do him any favours whatsoever. The doctor that was working there with him was very unscrupulous. And 40 years later, he actually gave an account of that time in the Stark Monroe letters. Now, basically, he was in partnership with a doctor called Dr. George Termavine Budd, and they didn't resonate together. They didn't work well together. He was very unscrupulous, Dr. Budd was, and he didn't like how he practiced medicine, and it pretty much ruined him. He left on the verge of bankruptcy of that practice. He lost a lot when he left that practice, but it was that bad for him, he would rather leave than, and take the chance and open up his own surgery than continue working with him. And that whole scenario is, I think, the first time he came across an injustice against himself. He's witnessed it in regards to nature, the brutality of the seals. But other than that, up to this point, he's starting to wake up to the brutality of humans. He saw that on his first posting on the ship.
Yeah.
As a medical officer between Liverpool and South Africa. And then he then sees it on a more home level within a practice. So
his sort of like first real sort of like attempt of starting out and earning his own living. And and thinking about it back then, I mean, it sounds like he probably, and his motivation to becoming a doctor does certainly sound like to help people. You know, he probably and those were his intentions. But I think this episode probably quite shocked him that, like anything, you know, you do get people that go into certain professions without the right intentions, and obviously back then the medical profession was the same, was vulnerable to this sort of thing.
Oh, very much so.
It was more about the money than the patient care.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And he didn't like that, or it didn't sit right with his moral standing. And again, this raises his level of injustice. So he would rather be, you know, bankrupt and, you know, whatnot. So he started his own practice. He rented a house, but he was only able to furnish the 2 rooms which his patients would see. The rest of the house was pretty bare, and it didn't start off particularly well, but he persevered, and he was hardworking and compassionate, and built up a really good doctor-patient rapport with his clients, as it were. And by the end of the 3rd year, his practice actually started to earn him a very comfortable income. He spent his time between being a good doctor and struggling to become a recognised author. He met a patient's sister called Louisa Hawkins and married her, and said of her that she was a gentle and amiable person.
Oh. I do like the way the Victorians sort of like describe their other halves and stuff. You know, that wouldn't be acceptable now, would it? If you just said that about your wife or your girlfriend, would it? No,
but the reasons you chose a wife back then were for totally different reasons to what you would choose now.
Yeah,
you know, you're looking for somebody to look after you, basically, so you can get on and do what you do best, from a male perspective. And it was somebody who was going to enhance your life. Yes, I mean, I'm not saying we don't look for that now, but it's a completely different dynamic in marriage now, isn't it? Because women are a lot more people in their own right, as much as anything else. But back then, it was basically she's very kind, she's very amiable, she's easy to get along with, she looks after me, she's quiet. That's what I'm after. I can do my thing.
Ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, I can do my thing, basically. Now, in 1886 even, he actually started writing the novel that we all know him for. The character, obviously, Sherlock Holmes. And it was named A Tangled Skein. The characters initially were called Sheridan Hope and Ormond Sacker.
Right.
Yeah, not so catchy as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
Not quite as catchy, is it?
No, but I suppose, Sheridan Hope, I suppose you can see a connection there in the name. But as for Omen Sacker, whether that was supposed to be Dr. Watson, I don't know so much.
Now, A Study in Scarlet introduced us to the immortal Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, and that exploded.
Yes.
I think the imagination. That's what it did. It caught people's imagination. Just shows you how important a name is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is roughly about the time of Jack the Ripper as well, wasn't it? How far back was that?
Well, Richard?
I don't know. I don't know, sort of like the year. Well, this was sort of like around... Yeah, it would have been around sort of like the 1680s. Yeah, 1689, quite possibly a year afterwards or so, yeah.
Okay,
1689?
No, 1889, sorry.
I was going to say, where are you in history?
Yeah.
I'm stuck in the 17th century here for some reason. I don't know why.
But
it's my favourite part of history.
People had a fascination with that sort of crime and punishment sort of thing, didn't they? So it does make perfect sense to write that sort of book.
He did, but he himself... Although this is the characters and the books that got him noticed and got him the fame, I suppose, you know, the author status that he wanted, they weren't his favourite books. He actually preferred his next novel, which no one knows now. It's called Micah Clarke.
This is quite a common trait in a lot of authors. A lot of authors that write sort of fiction and they're famous for, a lot of them have admitted that they just get the money coming in. I mean, in most authors, this is quite a writer's trait. They want to be known as the serious sort of author, and they do tend to look at their sort of works. And even Conan Doyle looked at and Sherlock Holmes and thinking, this is not quite what I want to write about, but people are reading it, so he sort of carries on. I wouldn't say begrudgingly, but he uses that. That obviously gives him the income for him to experiment in other forms of writing and follow what he really wants to do through writing.
Mm-hmm. But it is, considers it just like commercial. It's like, that's all right, that it's all right. But I much prefer my historical novels and my poems and my plays, which would have given him the serious author rather than a commercial author. And it was being considered that serious author that he was actually after, not the commercial side. Although the commercial side is very nice because it brings in the bucks. The other side of it would have given him the acclaim of his intellect that he was desiring.
Yes, I think he was actually after sort of an intellectual recognition as opposed to sort of just a general author. For sort of not penny dreadfuls, he's above that standard. But these sort of because they weren't actually published as books per se, like the Sherlock Holmes and stuff. They were usually published as series in magazines and stuff, and that sort of would generate a lot of money through popular magazines. Because this was the rise. The population had a growing literacy rate at the time, and their demand would have been for sort of cheap commercial sort of saleable products like magazines, and Conan Doyle and other authors always used to supplement their incomes by writing for them.
If only he had the foresight to realise how impactual, I made that word up right there, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, and how enduring they are as well. I mean, gosh, they're still making films, and people are still taking that concept and writing new material with those characters, even now. There's a museum on Baker Street, and how enduring is that tale? And actually, they are incredibly. They're quite complex.
Well, yes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that it's real as well because they would actually go to 12B Baker Street and have their photo taken outside the house where Sherlock Holmes lived. Obviously, in the books, because he wasn't real. But
I know, people think he was a real person.
Yeah.
And also, on the Underground, you've got the silhouette of Sherlock Holmes with his pipe and his deerstalker hat in the tiles.
Baker Street,
So
Baker Street Station.
It's so enduring. And it's a shame that he was so disparaging about his own work and his own creation. At the time he wrote it, you think, gosh, if only you knew. If only you knew. All your other work is basically pretty much forgotten, apart from your Sherlock Holmes work and Dr. Watson, obviously. If you realised that how popular that was going to be. I've got to ask the question, though. For me, my ultimate Sherlock Holmes is Basil Rathbone.
That's who I grew up with, watching the old black and white movies on television, and it was Basil Rathbone for me as well.
Paul?
Not really read Sherlock Holmes.
Mind you, I did quite like Peter Cushing's rendition of him in Hound of the Baskervilles.
The only thing that I have actually, I mean, I've watched the odd film here and there, but I did actually like the new version with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes.
The TV
series of it. That was absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
was that contemporary?
Yeah.
It was very much up to date, modern, like Sherlock Holmes was living now, as opposed to back in the Victorian period. So it was, I resonated with that one more. And that was written by Mark Gatiss.
Whose inspiration, obviously, was the original works by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Conan Doyle,
exactly.
But it shows the enduring sort of character, doesn't it? And the ability to actually move him through particular time spans as well, because you can retell those stories on a modern backdrop.
But this is where that, we talked about the surgeon doctor that taught him at Edinburgh University, when, you know, precision and observation and logic and reason and deduction, all those factors come through in that character. And that is something, it's called critical thinking, basically, isn't it? It's critical thinking, and he learnt that skill and translated that skill into a character which he didn't demonstrate actually within his own work, external of his writing. It's again, it's incredibly weird how he can write some so complex mysteries and cases with Sherlock Holmes, you know, just doing the deduction, and poor old Watson never quite getting it right, was he? And yet wasn't able to put that into his own work in sort of reality, you know, when he was coming across some of the cases we're going to look at in the future, you know, in later on in the show. But he also wrote around this time The Mystery of Klumber. Now, this really does, whereas before we've had tasters of ghost stories and things like that in his writing, this actually is the story that really highlights his fascination with the paranormal and spiritualism in there. And basically, it's like a revenge, karmic, spiritual reckoning kind of story.
Yeah.
And this book really, really sort of showcases his own fascination with that.
Yeah, he certainly seems to be sort of starting off with it. Well, this is certainly the first hint you get, don't you, of the sort of like, perhaps, I get the feeling it's more of a passing interest. It obviously develops a lot later. He's obviously waiting for a major event to sort of happen for him to actually sort of come out of the shadows, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, it certainly sort of just gives a hint, as you said, Kerry.
Well, I can say, I mean, even in some of the, going back to the Sherlock Holmes stories, some of those were very mysterious and almost very paranormal-esque, aren't they? Because even the Hounds of the Baskervilles, you know, that's been adapted so many times. You know, you could even look at it as Black Shark. You know, which I think was one of the other adaptations. So again, it's interpretation of what the Baskervilles was.
But I think those were his later writings of Sherlock Holmes. His earlier stories were sort of a bit different to that. But you're right. Even in the Sherlock Holmes, you start to see threads running through from his other passions, and folklore come into that, and superstitions come into that, and he does bring those through. But they're a bit later.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I mean, well, we haven't even got to the point where he kills him off yet, have we?
No, not really. Right, so we are now in August of 1889, and he meets with the managing editor of Lippincott's monthly magazine in Philadelphia. Now, he's come to London to organise a British edition of his magazine, and he invites Arthur Conan Doyle for dinner in London at the elegant Langham Hotel, which becomes actually a place of lots of bits in the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Well, yeah, a place Mr. Holmes frequents as well,
Yeah, so he was absolutely...
That's only because they couldn't afford to support it.
That must have been quite a good meeting, though, because he also invited Oscar Wilde, didn't he?
He did. And they got along very famously. Arthur says, "It was indeed a golden evening for me."
Yeah.
Oscar Wilde was a very flamboyant character in his own right, wasn't he?
And he was...
I think Oscar Wilde was a friend of anyone, wasn't he?
Kind of, yes.
especially Dorothy.
What?
I don't get that.
A friend of Dorothy.
No, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
Yeah.
I don't get that at all.
It's a term for someone that's gay.
I see. Sorry. I see. See. Oh, dear. Now, he actually commissioned Arthur Conan to write a short novel, which was published in England and in the United States in 1890. The story was The Sign of Four, and that really did establish Sherlock Holmes as a character and well, that basically was the point of, that's all you're going to be known for, basically, from here on out, in regards to writing.
You're typecast now.
Yeah.
You're typecast. It's EastEnders all the way for you now, Mr. Beale.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Oh, bless him. Oh, dear. Now, he'd actually set some time aside to write for The White Company, which was an historical novel, and it was always that kind of work he enjoyed more than the Sherlock Holmes work. But all of the characters all display decency, honour, right or wrong, strong moral standings.
Yeah.
They all demonstrate these kind of characters. And 30 years later, he told a journalist that he was young and full of the first joys of life and action. And I think I got some of it into my pages. When I wrote the last line, I remember that I cried. Well, I'll never beat that. And threw the ink pen at the opposite wall.
Yeah, he seems to have a very good sort of knack of being very retrospective of himself, isn't he?
I would say it's quite dramatic.
Yeah,
I mean, who's heard of The White Company by Arthur Conan Doyle?
I have.
Oh! I hadn't.
It's set during the 100 Years' War. It's a medieval novel. The White Company was actually a company of soldiers during the 100 Years' War that went off to sort of Italy. They were led by a Colonel John Hawkins. They were principally English, but they sort of were soldiers for hire. They went over to the Italian states and hired their services out to the various factions that were fighting in Italy during the late early 1400s.
No.
So you know that, but you don't know when Jack the Ripper was about.
I know.
No, that's terrible, right.
No, we should know that. We've covered that enough with bloody Jack the Ripper. We should know
absolutely.
that.
I'm not a huge Ripper sort of, fan. I mean, I don't tend to delve into the Ripper stuff much. I know sort of for a paranormal sort of host that's a bit unusual, but it doesn't really sort of float my boat much, to be quite honest. But give me The White Company and medieval soldiers any day,
okay, we'll
all
give you
day
that.
long.
Oh, he then left Portsmouth, went to Vienna to specialise in ophthalmology, which is to do with the eyes. Apparently, I had to Google that because I didn't know what that was.
Oh, right. That's why you put it in brackets afterwards, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone knew what that was. Didn't go very well. He didn't speak the language, so he's trying to learn all about eyes in a language he doesn't speak. And basically came back to London and opened a practice in Upper Wimpole Street. Now, in his autobiography, he states that not a single patient ever crossed his door. Didn't go well then.
No. So another reality check for him.
Another little one, but his writing is taking off at this point, so he's not at the level of bankruptcy that he was previously. Now, at this time, he met up with a guy called A.P. Watt. Now, this is basically his, what would we say, editor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I read. Yeah, editor. Yeah.
It deals with the business side of promoting his work and selling his work for him. And that's the bit that Arthur Conan Doyle just doesn't like, really. So he passes that duty over to A.P. Watt, and he says it relieved him of his hateful bargaining. He hated having to tout his work and say how much he thought it was worth. And he could then concentrate purely on the creative process of writing. Now, Watt made the deal with the Strand magazine to publish the Sherlock Holmes stories. The image of Holmes was created by the illustrator Sidney Paget, who basically took his brother as a model for the great detective. Handsome chap.
Handsome chap with a deer stalker and a pipe.
Apparently
no less.
so. Yeah. Oh dear, it's funny. In 1891, he became very ill with influenza, and that was when he said, I don't really want to be a doctor anymore, I want to be a writer, and I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to give it up. I'm not going to become a doctor anymore. And he adds, I love these quotes, I have to say. He said, I remember in my delight taking the handkerchief which lay upon the coverlet in my enfeebled hand and tossing it up to the ceiling in my exultation. I should at last be my own master. He has definitely got a sense of the dramatics going on, hasn't he?
He has, hasn't he?
I don't know quite how much of that is sort of like writer's license after the event, but he certainly has a way of putting it.
You can imagine him lying in bed, making the decision, and all he can muster, the only energy he can muster, is to chuck his handkerchief in the air and exult quietly while he's recuperating about his newfound freedom. And he has a child around this time as well. In 1892, his wife Louisa gives birth to a son who they call Kingsley.
Oh, a nice name.
So he becomes a dad.
Ah.
Oh, bless him. Now, he's actually quite a prolific writer, believe it or not. He's actually written so many works, it's untrue. There's a whole bibliography of him. We're picking out just certain ones, obviously. And he decides to get rid of Sherlock Holmes because he thinks that he's had enough. Everyone's focusing on this. I'm writing all this other stuff and no one's paying any attention to it. They only want the Sherlock Holmes on. So he decides to kill him off. So in a trip to Switzerland, he finds the spot where his hero was going to come to his end. And it's called The Final Problem. And that's almost very indicative of how he felt about this. I know, I'll kill him off and I'll call it The Final Problem. I can get rid of him and then I'm going to be free to write whatever I want. And that's going to be my claim that I need, not the commercial side. It's going to get me the acclaim that I want. Right?
And didn't go down too well, did it, that?
Not really.
No.
Not really. A lot of people are very upset about this.
Especially the editor of the magazine at the time. They had 20,000 readers cancel their subscription. He must have had a heart attack.
Yeah, this is probably the inspiration for Stephen King's Misery.
Yeah. It's a bit of a shock to the system. 20,000 people cancel their subscriptions. And you can imagine, like, what are you doing? You know.
What have you done?
Life changes on a flip of a coin, remember. Just remember that. Yeah. Now, he hasn't got his medical career anymore because he's given that up. He's got rid of the fictional character that didn't really float his boat and, you know, got rid of it. He got involved in more intense activity. And in his blind, you know, he's so blinded by his newfound freedom and his work that he's then doing, he actually overlooks the fact that his wife is not very well at all. She had tuberculosis. She was only given a few months to live. It was a bit of a shock to the system for Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
He sort of took her for granted, I feel, up to this point. She's not really sort of mentioned much. She's a very shady character in the background. Although she's still there. She's had his son, you know.
Well, she's been very amenable, isn't she?
Very amenable in the background. Now, he actually used his medical skill at this point, and he kept her alive. She was only given a few months to live, but he saw her through a good few more years.
Yeah, which I think, you know, can possibly hint at it.
Barclays app features help me manage my money and see where it's going. Now I've got that all-seeing feeling. I can see all my upcoming scheduled payments so I can plan ahead. See exactly when and where I spend my money so I know what types of things I'm spending it on. And compare my monthly balances so I can see my every move. Get the all-seeing feeling for yourself with money management features in the Barclays app. Make money work for you. Barclays. You need to be 16 or over to use the Barclays app. T's and C's apply.
Already have a podcast? It's time to join Spreaker's monetization program, the easiest way to profit from your passion starting on day one. You decide which episodes and exactly where you want the ads to be inserted, and Spreaker takes care of the rest. If you're not on Spreaker, it's easy to import your podcast in just a few clicks, and then you can monetize your older episodes too. For one free month on a pro account, visit Spreaker.com/monetize. That's SPREAKER.com/monetize to join and start making money today.
It's probably his skill as a physician. If it was recognised, you know, he probably would have made a very good physician if his sort of career path went down there.
Exactly.
That route.
Yeah, exactly. But he didn't. He looked after Louisa. She becomes a patient, basically. She becomes unable to fulfil her wifely duties. And he actually lost his father around this time as well. So it actually caused a Great Depression for him. And he became more and more fascinated by basically spiritualism and life after life. You know, that's what he had been sort of like, this is what sort of made him step forward more into the forefront of that. He was looking for answers. And it drove him to join the Society of Psychical Research, the SPR. And that is where he made a public declaration of his interest and belief in the occult.
Right.
Around
Well, yeah, I suppose joining the SPR at the time, it must have been quite a young organisation back then, but yeah, that would have been quite a public declaration in itself, wouldn't it?
Very much so. Now, at this point, we are going to take a quick break on that bombshell of him joining the SPR, which is kind of the bit of history that everybody kind of knows, thinks they know a little bit more. And we're going to take a quick break, and so join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, today we're talking all about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the life and times and studies and interests and his writing and all sorts of stuff about Arthur Conan Doyle. And we've just got to the point in his biography, should we call it, of where he joined the Society of Psychical Research, the SPR. Now, around this time, at the same time, he went and did a series of lectures in the United States. Now, this was a bit of a disappointment for Sir Arthur. You think of all the prolific writing he's done, all they kind of wanted to talk about was Sherlock Holmes.
That's right.
The curse of for him.
Yeah, the curse of Sherlock Holmes hangs over him.
It kind of was. Now, his lectures were called Readings and Reminiscences, and he basically was talking about his inspiration for various works and, you know, doing bits of readings and all sorts of things like that. But all the questions that were asked by the audience were all to do with Sherlock Holmes. I think he starts to wake up to the fact that maybe he should stick to that and earn his money that way. But you've also got to remember he's coming out of this very depressive period for him. So this must have been one of those life changes where you think what you want and what you get are two different things, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, he must be sitting there thinking, is it all worth it at the end of the day? Should I just go back to doing what I'm known for?
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been and he must have been going through quite a big turmoil as well. You know, he's sort of come off the back of quite a sort of bad time of his life, and you know, and he's probably set out quite an optimistic to tour the States and sort of really express how he feels about his writings and stuff like that. And then all he gets asked is, what about Sherlock?
Yeah.
When Sherlock coming back and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it must have been a bit of a blow to his ego, a little bit on this one. But his work in the SPR continues, and, you know, he starts to embrace that side of things, and his quest for answers is still they haven't been answered, so he's still out on that quest. And in 1894, a gentleman called Colonel Elmore actually asked the SPR to investigate mysterious sounds coming from his home in Dorset down in Charmouth. Been to Charmouth, nice little place.
Oh, right. Was it by the seaside?
Yeah, it's a really nice place actually. Now, at night, always happened at night, Dr. Elmore, his wife and adult daughter could hear chains being dragged across a wooden floor and moaning that sounded like a soul in torment.
Is that coming from the upstairs bedroom line?
Right, you never know, right? Now,
sorry, carry on.
The dog refused to enter certain parts of the home, and a lot of the staff had left because of this. Now, Arthur, Sidney Scott and Frank Podmore were sent to investigate the possible haunting. Now, they spent several nights there, but generally their results were inconclusive. But Arthur, this is where you start to see the skeptics and the believers. Arthur Conan Doyle believed this was a haunting. He was there. Yep. He was well in this. He just bought into it completely. There was no critical thinking, no rationality there. He believed that this was a genuine poltergeist phenomena. You know, he didn't want to... didn't want to open his mind at all. I just didn't think he did.
No, he set himself, this is what it is. Let's go down, have a look. He sort of went in believing it and came out believing it, despite sort of lack of any sort of evidence per se. Well, apart from the second night where there was a fearsome uproar, whatever that's supposed to mean. But no damage was caused or anything, and they just sort of left it there.
Yeah. I mean, now they did find the skeleton of a young child in the grounds of it. And, that kind of backs up his confirmation bias that this was a genuine haunting of this child now. They've now got a character that is doing the haunting. However, the other two were a lot more sceptical. And, Podmore himself interviewed the various members of the household and actually came to the conclusion that it was a hoax by the young boy that lived in the house, and it was a prank, basically, and totally disbelieved. You've got such a polarised perspective, a total believer and a total sceptic. One believing it was completely rational and explainable and a hoax, and the other one going, no, it's actually a real life poltergeist. And this is, other than that, they've done witness statements. They've done, they went to experience it. But generally, in regards to how they investigated, there's not a lot of information on it. There might well be in the archives at the SPR. Who knows? Haven't looked at it myself, so we would never know, I suppose. But he did believe it. But then we see this with him. He's an outright believer. He takes everything at face value in regards to spiritualism and, hauntings and stuff like that. I mean, he doesn't apply. It's obvious he got critical thinking in his brain because he created Sherlock Holmes. But in regards to this, I think his quest and his desire for answers and the need for there to be something more, something afterwards, that we live on after our physical bodies have gone, his need to believe that was so deep, his critical thinking took a back step.
He's obviously developed a belief system, isn't he? He believes it, and that's very hard to shift in a lot of people, isn't it? You get a lot of people, and even today, sort of go out in the paranormal sort of field to investigate, but a lot of them are sort of like, let's face it, they're believers, full stop. So we've all been to sort of locations, and you can, and when you people watch, you can sort of point and you can sort of see the critical thinkers and sort of what one sounds to one person as sort of explainable to another. It is what it is, a ghost or whatever, or what they wanted to believe when they arrived.
I'd like to hope these days, with a lot more information, a lot more knowledge that is out there and available. You've got to remember, back in the day, this is very early days of the SPR. They're finding their feet within the society themselves. There's a lot of great thinkers coming out with lots of different concepts and ideas and theories regarding the paranormal. And again, you've got this melting pot club of people trying to work out what is, if anything, going on. Is it all explainable or is it not? Still to this day we haven't got definitive answers, but we've got at this time, this melting pot of ideas and concepts and theories coming to the table, and he's amongst all of this with his set belief system that we do go on, that there is something after we die, that that spirits can be earthbound and create havoc in regards to poltergeist phenomena. I would love to have known. It would have been very interesting what he would have made of the Enfield haunting later. You know, because in regards to this particular case, there's not a lot of information out there that I could find, but as I say, you can guarantee the SPR have got all the files and letters and whatever was written about it in their files. For my preliminary research, it was very polarised. It was like Podmore was like totally sceptical and said it was a rational explanation, and Arthur Conan Doyle, totally believed it was a poltergeist. So I think it maybe left him wanting that experience, his first ghost hunt. It totally confirmed his belief system, but he's now also being showcased that there is a different way of looking at this. As well, because he's surrounding himself with people with different perspectives and, as I say, theories on what it could be. But he then sets sail for New York with his brother Innis, and he was going to give more talks in 30 cities.
Well, yeah, back then, lecture tours were lecture tours. That is sort of like, you know, bands today, they go on tour, I mean, and stuff like that. And this is what authors and writers done back in the day. They went on tour.
Yeah.
The 30 cities.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, nowadays, they go on every podcast and every TV show and everything that they can get their mitts on. You know, then they did tours of their, you know, authors did tours. And basically, it goes down really well. His personality is a peculiarly attractive one to the Americans because it is so thoroughly wholesome. That's a quote. You know, someone says so thoroughly wholesome. He's a very amiable, to use that word on him, character. He's just a genuinely nice person who's got really nice manners and standards, and he's incredibly intelligent and well spoken, and he's brilliant. He had a great time.
I'm not sure his mum might agree with that. She'd be like, when he's home, he was a right little
right little so and so, yeah.
Getting me mixed up with Mary again, ain't you?
This certainly seems to be a trait he developed sort of later on in life about this stage, and because of the sort of like you read sort of people that sort of met him after sort of like his sort of after he joined the SPR and sort of and he was out and about, they all sort of comment on him being a really sort of lovely guy, as we call and as we'd say today.
Very much so. Now, in 1896, he took Louisa to Egypt. He was hoping that the weather, more climate weather over there, would actually help her. And he produced a novel, The Tragedy of Korosko. Basically, you see the influences now of his travels starting to come into his work. I mean, he's well-travelled. I mean, when you think about it, he doesn't shy away from travelling at all, no matter what's going on around him. And depression could be enough to put anybody to their beds, but that didn't stop him, did it?
No, he certainly seems to be. I'm sort of getting the impression now, sort of going through this. He certainly seems to be quite a sort of like a Renaissance man of his time. You know, embracing all the new sort of stuff that has been sort of, you know, the products of the Victorian era which are coming forward, like sort of the tentative sort of travelling and stuff like that. He certainly embraces it all and sort of uses it to its full extent.
Mm-hmm. And around this time, he also wrote the Brigadier Gerard stories, and they were also very popular with his readers. But again, I'd not really heard of Brigadier Gerard.
I haven't actually, no. I'm surprised that slipped below my radar, what with him being a Brigadier.
Pardon?
Very surprised. I'm very surprised at that. At this book.
Yeah, I know, right? God, wrote the White, whatever it was.
The White Company.
Yeah, the White Company, but it doesn't know about Brigadier.
Exactly.
No.
Now, in 1897, he actually fell in love with a lady called Jean Leckie. He remained celibate to Louisa through her illness, but he did meet Jean, and this is he remains faithful to Louisa, bearing in mind Louisa's incredibly poorly and is a patient now. Remember that. So she's not actually a wife, but Jean was a strikingly beautiful woman, and she was very accomplished for the time. You know, she was very good. She was very clever. She was a good sportswoman even, and she was a good singer. And she was really, really attractive and attracted to Conan Doyle. So these two met, and although he was seeing her on the side, so basically they were having an affair behind Louisa's back. Louisa was in no fit state to really be the wife or company that Arthur needed at this time. And these situations you see crop up from time to time. You're faithful to your wife, but on the side you've got this situation going on. He never stepped into the role of partner with Jean until Louisa had passed. So, but he had met her whilst Louisa was still alive. And that's, again, bless him. You know what I mean? On one hand, bless him. The harder women out there be going, no, he should not have gone anywhere near another woman. But you got to remember, Louisa's really ill. She's got tuberculosis. You know, that's not a light kind of illness.
Yeah, I mean, you can't condemn the man for that alone. No, although there's men out there that have done a lot worse.
There are men out there that have done a lot worse. Now, it was around the same period he actually wrote a play about Sherlock Holmes, and I think he's starting to realise after all his lectures and meeting his readers that that's where the money is. That's what's going to shore up his bank account. That's the one that's going to, keep him in a lifestyle he's become accustomed to. So he wrote a play about Sherlock Holmes and gave him a new lease of life, as it were. Now, an American actor, William Gillette, read the script and actually asked for permission to revise it. Conan Doyle agreed, because you've got to remember, he doesn't really care about Sherlock Holmes. He sees it as a cash cow.
That's right, and someone comes along and goes, is it all right if I go off and mess around with this? Go, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, do what you like, yeah. And actually says to the guy, you may marry him, murder him, or do anything you like to him. Now, Gillette's version was sent back to him, but there was very little left of the original script. And all he said to that was he wasn't even that bothered. He just said, it's good to see the old chap again. So the disdain he holds for Sherlock Holmes is actually, that's a little crushing to me. I love Sherlock Holmes stories. I know.
I could just imagine going, well, yeah, it's good to see him back.
Yeah. But the play itself opened in London at the Lyceum Theatre, but the British critics panned it and didn't like it at all. But it's hardly surprising because it's actually so far removed from Arthur Conan Doyle's work. It's actually Gillette's work now. You know,
what do they know?
What do they know? The public loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. And actually, doesn't matter who writes the Sherlock Holmes story, people still love it today. Hence, the TV series point in fact.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's still, even in the TV series, there's still a lot of Arthur Conan Doyle's influences.
Yeah.
Not just with the characters, but the whole world that Sherlock lived in. I mean, his house in the TV series, his house was very Victorian in style, and all his stuff, all the books and everything that he had was all very Victorian-esque. But then, obviously, when he stepped out the front door, it was very modern. So it really worked well. You can see both influences.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other, can you?
No, I think
exactly.
Anybody who writes Sherlock Holmes always refers to the original stories in the first place to take their inspiration from, to stay true to the character. It's any adaptation that I've seen have always tried incredibly hard to stay true to the original character that was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
And some people have managed that incredibly well. I mean, some of the modern TV series, Sherlock Holmes, surpasses Arthur's original work with a more depth and complexity that you can it's not out of your remit of what you would expect Sherlock Holmes to be like as a character, with that complexity, putting modern takes and modern things we know now over what he knew then. It's just it's incredibly well done, but the mindset and the character himself is so iconic that the modern writers take great pains to maintain the originality of Sherlock Holmes within his work.
Yeah, to keep his integrity intact.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it proves the character himself, and it must prove through the writing, the original writings, that it is a solid foundation that will last for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the 1900s, he actually volunteered for the Boer War, deemed unfit. He was actually 40 at this point. He was overweight. So he went as a medical doctor and sailed for Africa. He actually saw more soldiers and medical staff die of typhoid fever than of war wounds.
Yes, this was actually very common during the Boer War, and there's a lot of articles written by a lot of sort of individuals about this particular time, and it was quite a shock to the British public, considering we were just entering into a new century and we were supposed to be quite advanced, and sort of like the army was still quite behind on a lot of things, and particularly the welfare of their soldiers. And the Boer War sort of highlighted that, a bit like the scandal at the time during the Crimean War some 50 years before, with Florence Nightingale. Highlighted a lot of soldiers there were succumbing to disease as apart from the battlefield. So, yeah, that would have had an impact on him.
Definitely. But he wrote The Great Bowel War, which was a 500-page chronicle, and is said to be a masterpiece of military scholarship. It's not just a report of the war, but it was also a commentary about the organisational shortcomings of the British forces at the time. This is where I think he's thinking politically. I can make a difference here. This is something I'm good at. It was well received, piece of work, and very eye-opening to the public. You know, when he returned from that, he actually tried to enter politics, running for a seat in central Edinburgh. Now, he describes this as being the premier radical stronghold of Scotland. Of course, Edinburgh Castle, everybody.
Well, yeah, the radicals, yeah.
Radical stronghold.
A lot of people probably say it still is.
Now, politics is a murky old field, as we know. They will use all sorts of things against him or against you if you're running. So all your dirty linen is basically going to be put out there in public, everybody, if you want to run for office in any sort of shape or form. Now, he was actually raised by Jesuits. So he was actually unfairly accused of being a Catholic bigot. So he actually lost his race on that fact, that because people didn't really want a Catholic bigot on a seat in Parliament. But it was only a narrow margin he lost by.
Yeah, it's quite surprising, and particularly in Scotland, which is a very much sort of particularly that side of Scotland is very much staunchly Anglican sort of part of Scotland. So, yeah, for him only just to lose, I mean, that's quite something, and that's quite a feat.
So he returned to London and continued writing. Now, the next novel, now this is, again, one of the most iconic imageries you've got of part of Arthur Conan Doyle's work. Now, he went to stay on the Devonshire moors and included a visit to Dartmoor Prison. Well, this is just an explosion of creativity right there, isn't it? It's based mainly on local folklore about an inhospitable manor, an escaped convict, and a huge black sepulchral hound.
Well, there you go.
The Hound
I
of
recognise that brief. That would make a good story.
Yeah, make a really good story, that would. But I think that demonstrates that he is talking to people, not just about, he's talking about folklore and spiritualism and supernatural and tying all these threads into a story. And he's on the moors, Dartmoor moors or Devonshire moors. They are very bleak places. You know, they're not hospitable areas. And you really he captures this in this book. He really captures your imagination in this book, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I've read the book and I've sort of like, but it's one of my favourite movies, and the Hammer movie. I mean, they capture it really well.
Mm-hmm.
And having been to Dartmoor myself, you can, you know, the whole landscape just for an author to go to or someone with a creative mind. I mean, the landscape alone is the inspiration. You can just pull so much from it.
Totally, and he certainly did, because again, one of the best known, but if you ask, you know, name a Sherlock Holmes book, Hound of the Baskervilles has got to be one of those that you remember. Now, in 1902, King Edward VII, that's right, isn't it? 7th, V11?
Yep,
7th,
yeah.
I always get confused with the old Roman numerals. Knighted Conan Doyle for services rendered to the Crown during the Bowel War. But, little gossip on this one, the King was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and sort of like, they reckon that when the honours list was being made up, he sort of was like, put him on it.
Put him on it, yeah, the King go, yeah.
I want to meet him. I want him knighted for that. Now, in 1903, the Strand magazine started serialising the return of Sherlock Holmes. Quite a contented little time for old Conan Doyle, I feel, at this time.
Yeah, I wonder if they got their 20,000 subscribers back.
Yeah, you'd hope so, wouldn't you?
I would think they probably did. And I would imagine that it was played handsomely to reinvent his character, to bring him back from the dead. Back from the dead. Now, during this whole time, he's writing, he's looking after Louisa, he's got Jean on the side, very discreetly. Yeah. He's playing golf, he's driving fast cars, he's going hot air ballooning. He's actually having a go at flying aeroplanes.
Going back that far, are they really fast cars?
As fast as they went at the time.
Yeah. And I like it.
Maybe like 8 miles an hour.
And he also had enough time to spend on muscle development.
Yeah. Bodybuilding.
Yeah. So, you know, he was obviously quite a conscious sort of fit sort of guy. He obviously looked after himself.
To do that.
Not being funny, he seems to have an awful lot of time off, doesn't he, to do all these things?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And they're all very privileged pastimes. He's not done badly financially, has he, if he can do this?
No, exactly.
Really. In 1906, he had another go at politics, but again, lost. And it was I know, right? And it was in this year that Louise had actually died.
Right.
He didn't take that very well. He entered another depressive period, and he wasn't. Well, he seems that when he goes into his depression, rather than doing that, everyone goes, "Oh, you're depressed," you don't achieve anything. He actually seems to achieve or focus his attentions very much into his work throughout these times. And this is where the injustice at this point for him is incredible. It really steps forward. I think, from my very unknowledgeable place of thing, I think he feels that it's an injustice. Whenever he's looked at, he's gone through the Bowel War, he's gone through this time of plenty and settlement, and Sherlock Holmes, it's unfair. Why should he, of all the writings I've done, be the one that is giving me the money to do all these wonderful things?
Yeah.
Louisa, lovely Louisa, passes away. The injustice of that. Why should somebody so lovely and so young, effectively, because they're not old people at this time, that injustice of her being taken away from him sends him off into, how should we say it, he goes on crusades almost at this point.
It seems that when he gets depressed, it sort of like spurs him to do something because and people often think of depression, and when people get depressed, they turn very sort of bitter, don't they? And sort of, but he seems to go the other way. He seems to want to try and help others who he deems to be unfortunate, like himself. he can probably see a lot of himself in others who are going through difficult times.
Yeah. And he focuses on miscarriages of justice on this one. So he almost becomes his own version of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Ish. Which is, considering he doesn't like the character that much, it's a bit weird.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But this is sort of what he does. Now, he takes on the case of George Adulgi, who had been convicted of slashing a number of horses and cows. But Scotland Yard was going hammer for tongue for this guy. They weren't listening to reason, but Arthur Conan Doyle steps in and actually says that Adulgi's eyesight was so poor that he couldn't possibly have done what they were accusing him of. He could not stand the injustice of that. It seems a strange case for him to focus on.
Yeah.
But that was sort of like the first step. It's almost like, that's wrong. They are so wrong. I'm going to prove them wrong. You know, he sort of takes up the mantle of this young man. And he just couldn't bear it. He just literally couldn't bear it.
Yeah, it's a funny one, as you say, but, he seems to be sort of bringing in sort of stuff from his past. You know, he's a qualified doctor, and he's sort of perhaps having attempts to doing early forensics on sort of cases and stuff like that he's looking at, and perhaps using that as a way to sort of highlight potential injustices.
Well, he takes on another criminal cause, the case of Oscar Slater. Now, he writes about this, but again, we're looking at a case that he felt was a huge miscarriage of justice, purely and simply because of the character of Slater and the consequences of the murder. But it's all coincidental. When we talked about with Paul, what was it last week? Coincidental evidence?
Oh, yeah.
So it's all coincidental. It's not actually fact. There's nothing actually factual about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all circumstantial.
Yeah, circumstantial, yeah.
That's the word, circumstantial evidence. And when you actually look into this case, which is out there for you to read, and a lot of, newspaper articles and police reports and stuff like that, very, very interesting case in its own right. He takes up on this case because he doesn't believe that the guy did what he did. It's just totally circumstantial. And I don't know what to make of it all, really. But it was driven by the media, as it always bloody is. And, but it's a thoroughly interesting case. So go and check out the case of Oscar Slater if you get the chance to, because it is an interesting one. But he really does focus on this as a case of injustice, and sort of gets his teeth into that. He doesn't waste much time after the death of Louisa to marry Jean even, not Jane, and they move to Windlesham.
Good old Windlesham.
His writing slows down. He tries to write some plays, one based on Brigadier Gerard again, and they didn't do very well at all. And this is when he wrote the Sherlock Holmes story, personal favourite of mine, called The Speckled Band. It was actually originally a play, but then turned into a story. Funny little anecdote about this one, because it involves a snake. Spoilers, everybody. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen this particular one. Now, it actually involves a snake. Now, the author insisted upon a real one, a real snake. But the actors and the crew weren't so keen, and they wanted a fake one, basically. And then, but Arthur Conan Doyle won and had a real snake. Later, he admitted his mistake. He said, this is really funny, the python either hung down like a pudgy yellow bell rope, or else, when his tail was pinched, endeavoured to squirm back and get level with the stage carpenter who pinched him. That is not in the script. How innocent that you thought this snake was going to act how he wanted it to.
But he doesn't seem a stubborn sort of person who goes, well, sort of most people would be persistent, say, well, it was a good idea, and blame other people. But he's perfectly prepared to say, oh, well, that and that wasn't a very good idea of mine, was it?
Not really, but at least he admitted it, I suppose.
Yeah.
It was a huge success, whatever, and it made him a lot of money. Jean then went on to give him 3 children. He had a son, Dennis, born in 1909. 1910, Adrian was born, and then in 1912 he got a daughter, and they named her Jean too.
Right. Didn't I have a tell back then? That's in quick succession, isn't it?
Well, his writing had slowed down, love. That's what had happened. Yeah. His writing had slowed down. We know what he was doing. Down. I know, right? His creative juices were flowing elsewhere at that time, is all I'm saying. Now, it was a couple of years before he carried on, and then he created the delightfully outrageous Professor Challenger. He's quite the opposite of Sherlock Holmes, and he wrote The Lost World. Now, you was talking earlier on about Journey to the Centre of the Earth and things like that.
Yeah.
This is very, very similar to that. And it was basically a boy's book. He was writing this for his kids, I think, in his head.
Right,
he wanted to write something that embraced that time of his life. And it was termed science fiction, basically now. But back then, it was a jolly good yarn for my boys kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, from what I remember, isn't it? The Lost World has got dinosaurs in it and all sorts. Isn't
that why they called the Jurassic Park film The Lost World?
Possibly, yeah. That's possibly sort of like in homage to Arthur.
I thought there was that link there, but I could have been wrong anyway. This was serialised in The Strand. The Strand is done very well for Arthur Conan Doyle, basically. And he wrote The Valley of Fear, which is the second full-length Sherlock Holmes novel. And again, this is put into The Strand magazine. The Strand magazine has done very well off Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I feel. They've certainly got the best of him. The readers weren't very satisfied with this particular tale, though, as Sherlock Holmes was actually absent during a greater part of the novel. He was only in it a little bit.
Well, yeah, just put him in towards the end, don't they, or something like that, yeah. Well, and we've all been to films and stuff like that. You sort of go thinking that you're going to see your favourite actor and they only sort of appear.
They're just a cameo. They're just a cameo in it. You're like, oh, is that it? Thought it was going to be in it more.
Yeah.
I think the advertisers...
Like Stan Lee in the Marvel movies, you know, you blink and you miss him.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Now, he goes to New York in 1914, doesn't like it, likes Canada, returns back home to the UK when the war is impending with Germany. Now, he is basically now on he's flashing back to his Boer War days, and he's urging everybody to organise military readiness before the war breaks out. He says these new factors are the submarine and the airship. He foresaw the possibility of a blockade by enemy submersible ships long before anybody in the Navy did. He's very forward-thinking in regards to military operations in this one. He said the only solution would be to build a channel tunnel. How many years later did that happen?
Quite a few.
But they were judged actually to be by naval experts. They said these were fantasies.
Well, yeah, they actually said they're Jules Verne fantasies, didn't they?
Now who's laughing? Who's laughing?
Who's laughing now, everybody?
Yeah.
When World War I broke out, he offered to enlist again, was denied, but actually set out to organise a civilian battalion of over 100 volunteers. When the Navy lost more than 1,000 lives in a single day, Conan Doyle made suggestions to the War Office to provide inflatable rubber belts and inflatable lifeboats. He also spoke of body armour to protect the soldiers on the front. Now, World War I was an horrific time of war. We all know the war, trench warfare, don't we?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the troops going over there, the transportation, he was not just seeing it as boots on the ground, as it were, in the trenches. He was seeing the bigger picture. And this is a quality of him that wasn't fully embraced, I feel. But again, shows his rationality, his foresight, his incredible imagination of how to solve a problem, basically.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, he's sort of like, he's not sort of like looking at the military practicalities of it. He's not going to the government saying, "Oh, you should have these sorts of guns and stuff like that." He's sort of got very much the welfare of the people that are actually going to have to carry this endeavour out. You know,
but
life belts he's talking about. You know.
In like World War II, didn't the English have like cardboard cutouts of tanks that they would stick on the ground so that it looked like we had so many tanks waiting for the Germans to come over the channel?
Yeah, well, that was during World War II. So when
the planes flew over, they just see loads of tanks. Because I remember an episode of Dad's Army, they had inflatable tanks. and they let them all loose. So he had flying tanks.
Well, that was World War II. This is actually World War One. And again, he doesn't stop writing. He writes the British campaign in France and Flanders, and he was actually allowed to visit the British and French fronts in 1916. He says he will never forget the horrors of the tangled, mutilated horses, their necks rising and sinking, lying amongst the blood-soaked remains of fallen soldiers.
Yeah, it must have been quite, again, you know, he certainly wasn't afraid to actually go to the front and view what was actually going on.
He really is, at this time, fighting injustice on every front he can. In the only way he knows how, by writing about it. And he's just incredible. You know, the incredible lengths he goes to do this. I mean, he actually put... in The Lost World, he's actually put one of the characters on people he met at this time. You know, people that he deemed to be outstanding characters, you know.
Yeah, and it's obviously his way of immortalising these people he met.
Yeah.
You know, in his work.
Yeah, he's an incredible character. He's just incredible. Now, oh dear. In 1917, he gave his first public lecture on spiritualism. He wanted to present the facts as he knew them for the benefit of mankind. Again, it's that help, isn't it? It's that, I want to do this for the benefit of people, not just for himself. He's always externalising help for people in whatever way that happens, whether that's bringing people's attention in his work on the Boer War. He's done it by trying to give his help and his foresight to the generals and stuff in World War One, you know, and now he's focusing on spiritualism, and he knew he knew his reputation would probably suffer by becoming an outspoken person for this movement, but he wrote books, articles, made countless public appearances to promote his beliefs. But he's such a lovely person. And he was so sincere about it that everyone considered him to be really well-intentioned.
Well, yeah.
You know, but he's not very critical thinking on this front.
That's right. I mean, it's his like personality sort of comes through, but you know, people around him sort of, especially sort of people like Harry Price. I mean, you know, even he sort of like admits that he was sort of like a real nice person, an extraordinary and lovable person, but Harry Price sort of made his career out of exposing false mediums and psychics and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he even said like he was very credential. You know, he had all the credentials to be really good.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. You know, Harry Price actually states that setting aside for the moment his extraordinary and most lovable personal qualities, the chief qualification that he possessed for the role of investigator was his crusading zeal. Amongst all the notable persons attracted to spiritualism, he was perhaps the most uncritical. His extreme credulity, indeed, was the despair of his colleagues, all of whom, however, held him in the highest respect for his complete honesty. Poor, dear, lovable, credulous Doyle. He was a giant in stature with the heart of a child. How lovely. I mean, that's, you know, he's coming up against these people, these great sceptical-minded people, with his complete belief in the paranormal and, you know, the spiritual, all of that side of things. And it's like, oh, bless him. you know, bless him. Now, he wrote, he's travelling all around the world on a psychic crusade, basically, at this time. He's throwing himself fully into this world now, partly because the war was very cruel to Conan Doyle. He lost his son, he lost his brother, he lost 2 brother-in-laws, and he lost 2 nephews in that war.
Mm-hmm.
He became very, very involved in this world. Again, he's searching for answers.
Yeah.
And in 1920, he was researching the topic of fairies, and he came across some pictures belonging to a family in Cottingley in Yorkshire. Now, if you want to hear about that, you're going to have to go and listen to last week's show, Away with the Fairies, where we talk about this one. And unfortunately now we look at this with very cold eyes, and we can obviously see it was a fake. Conan Doyle did not believe this was a fake. He was a huge proponent for this, really used this as a point of, this is real, this is proof, this is evidence. Unfortunately for him, we look at Arthur Conan Doyle and his work in the spiritual movement, and he becomes, nowadays, he's almost a laughable character for believing this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Shame.
You should just stick with Sherlock Holmes, I think.
And again, you look at the two, it's so divided, isn't it? You know, Sherlock Holmes, rational thinking, logic, reason, deduction, believes in the fairy photos. It just, you know, it's terrible, really. But he just couldn't believe the girls had lied to him as well. He just couldn't believe that.
Did he go to his grave thinking they were true, or was it actually pointed out to him? Was he sort of... Well, I don't suppose they were, because really it wasn't actually sort of fully revealed until about sort of like the 1970s, was it, when the girls actually confessed, even though it was widely suspected they were fakes, or widely known.
I believe so. I believe so. Now, his wife Jean also embraces his belief and actually develops a talent for trance writing. Now, remember the circles he's in. He's fully believing. They love him dearly. He's well liked. He's well respected, but they also think he's a bit batty for his belief system. His undying belief in everything, spiritual, occult, paranormal, whatever label you want to put it on. And his wife is fully believing as well, and she develops this talent of trance writing. Now, this is where Harry Houdini comes in.
Yeah.
We know Harry Houdini. He was very sceptical of spiritualism. He wanted proof, which, you know, fair point. We all want proof, don't we? That's what the quest is. Yeah. The quest is proof, in whatever way, shape or form that comes to you. And Harry Houdini was a master magician. He was an escapism. He could get himself out of situations that we all look at even now and think, how the hell did he do that?
I think you mean an escapologist or something, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, one of them.
Yeah, them as well.
One of them. Yeah. But he had also a huge interest in spiritualism, and he had a very close relationship with his mother, and he always had hopes of contacting her. He consulted many mediums, attended many seances, convinced that they were charlatans, but if they weren't, his mum and him had a code word. They had a code that they were, you know, if she was real, and on the other side she was going to pass this message back to Harry Houdini, and that message would be the one that made him believe.
Yeah.
He met Conan Doyle. They became friends. Conan Doyle wanted to make him a believer, total believer. So he basically said, come to a seance with me and my wife, and we will prove that your mother is alive and well on the other side.
Right.
Jean produced 15 pages of writing, supposedly from Houdini's mother. Now, he didn't doubt that their intention was to help him.
Yeah. The sincerity was there.
Exactly. But he did not believe that the messages given by Jean were from his mother. He didn't say so at the time. The messages were in English. His mother didn't speak English. They made no mention of the fact that the séance actually was happening on his mother's birthday. And the integral part of the message that she was going to give him to prove she was alive wasn't there either. So he didn't believe that Jean was real. He thought she was fake.
Mm-hmm.
He shared his doubts. And then basically, Conan Doyle comes up with the contract between the two worlds by producing a naturally translated effect. We hear this still, even to this day.
When I read this sort of piece, and I thought, well, that's pretty much what's sort of, say, touted around today. But, you know, it's as if he was the first person to actually put forward this theory.
He said that birthdays don't matter to the spirit realm.
Yeah.
But if you're after proof, it's those things that you're after.
Yeah.
If you're after proof, and if that was his mum, she would know that Houdini wants that information. She should have... If it was real, then those sort of things are the things you're after. That's your validating information that you have got the spirit that you've got.
Yeah.
Yeah? But he... You know, Conan Doyle's argument was birthdays don't matter to the spirit realm. And this kind of caused a rift in that friendship.
Yeah. I think they sort of parted their ways after that.
Yeah, very much so. And it became a very big rift in the end between the two of them. You know, Conan Doyle with his undying belief and Houdini saying, well, come on, look at the facts, man, you know?
Yeah.
You know, you're coming up with these arguments, but you can't back them up with anything. And that's a problem. He spent over £250,000 in pursuit of his esoteric dreams.
Which, well, back then was a fortune.
It was.
Yeah.
He wrote The Land of Mist, and his writing becomes incredibly cyclical in nature from here on out. He's mixing all of these things together now. He writes The Disintegration Machine, When the World Screamed. He then writes his last 12 stories about about Sherlock Holmes in the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. So he's in my view at this point he's kind of like throwing everything into the pot, and his overriding belief system in spiritualism is too influential on his work.
It sounds like he's gone all or bust, because particularly that amount of money must have been his entire fortune at the time, I should imagine, he put into this quest. And his writings on it, probably even back then and even today, it's quite a niche market, so there probably wouldn't have been a huge readership for that sort of stuff.
No.
So he probably wasn't making a lot. He probably wasn't making back what he was putting into it.
No.
Financially, that is.
No, we all know that there's no money in the paranormal, right?
Don't
think it was much different back then, to be fair. It's an expensive hobby at times, people. But he's writing these works basically to shore up his spending, expenditure on his, esoteric journey, as it were. And then in 1929, he was diagnosed with angina pectoris, heart disease, effectively,
right.
But he didn't stop him. He went off on a psychic tour of Holland, Denmark, Sweden and Norway. He was in a lot of pain. When he returned, he had to be carried ashore. After that, he was bedridden.
Right, so...
He arose one last time from his bed in the 1930. He rose from his bed, went into the garden. He was actually found lying on the ground, one hand clutching his heart and the other holding a single white snowdrop. He died on Monday, July the 7th in 1930, surrounded by his family. And his last words before departing were addressed to his wife. He whispered, "You are wonderful." Oh, that's so lovely. Oh, That makes me well up.
Oh dear, yeah, I can imagine you there, Kerry. Yeah.
Oh, got all emotion at that when I read that. Oh, bless. What a character Arthur Conan Doyle is.
He certainly is something.
Very good way with words.
Yeah.
He knew how to keep the wife happy, is all I'm saying. The last words. Well, he said I was wonderful.
Yeah.
No.
Well, at least he didn't say you are amenable.
Yeah, poor Louisa. She's just amenable, whereas, Jean,
You are wonderful.
she's wonderful. Yeah, no, I mean, generally his entire life is one big adventure, isn't it? It's translated through his work. His incredible character. I would like to have met him. I don't know about you two.
I certainly would have done.
Yeah,
He's certainly
definitely.
someone I feel I would have got on with.
I think,
And judging.
yeah, I think everybody
But-
got on with him.
But everyone that came into his life and spoke, and even his sort of like critics and stuff, they couldn't fault him as a caring, nice human being.
No, I think one...
And I mean, he had a really good way of describing other people as well.
Yeah.
So you just have to go on, do me now, go on.
Yeah.
What's mine?
He's absolutely fascinating character. There's so many multifacets to this man. One thing's for sure that came through our research into Arthur Conan Doyle was his help and his intention to help came through in every action he took, sometimes at detrimental effect to his own well-being. He didn't make decisions lightly. They affected him deeply when he had to put his father into an asylum. When his wife got tuberculosis, he saw her through that. His writing was prolific, much more than just Sherlock Holmes, although that work in itself is quite a phenomenal piece of work. His adventures in the cyclical world, although laughable at times, you can't overlook his zeal in that. And although he may not have done anything to push the field forward particularly, his undying belief that there was life after life is something that is enduring, just like Sherlock Holmes to this day. On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show. Oh, wow, is all I can say on that one.
I enjoyed that.
He's a good man, is old Arthur Conan Doyle.
Definitely learned so much about him as well.
He's incredible.
Certainly won't be so hard on him in future. I think a lot of sort of people in the paranormal can be quite hard, sort of in retrospect, but sort of like looking back on that, we needed him.
And his work
Despite-
still endures. I mean, when you look at some of the things he brought to the table, I mean, okay, Sherlock Holmes, that in itself, one thing that he did has endured. When you look at the work he's done in military history, and his thoughts on that, those are things we do now. Even talking about a Channel Tunnel, we've got that now. When you start looking at things like that, his foresight was just incredible, and I think it's very overlooked. And it's a shame that a lot of people view Sir Arthur Conan Doyle with a bit of a mockery. They take the mick out of him because of Cottony Fairies mainly. And obviously coming up against a giant himself, Harry Houdini. And, with what Harry Price said about him, he's got this caricature about him, which he doesn't deserve, really. Not really. We all have a belief system. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. If we totally dismissed life after life, we wouldn't even be bothering the quest for information and knowledge and theories, and none of us would be. That's why we're in the paranormal. So you can't criticise somebody for doing what you do yourself, regardless of your belief system. On that note, we've come to the end of the show. Do you want to say goodbye, guys?
Yeah. Goodbye, guys.
Barclays app features help me manage my money and see where it's going. Now I've got that all-seeing feeling. I can see all my upcoming scheduled payments so I can plan ahead. See exactly when and where I spend my money so I know what types of things I'm spending it on. And compare my monthly balances so I can see my every move. Get the all-seeing feeling for yourself with money management features in the Barclays app. Make money work for you. Barclays. You need to be 16 or over to use the Barclays app. T's and C's apply.